They call them the most anxious generation, the most depressed generation, the weakest generation that can't handle anything without trigger warnings and safe spaces. Let me tell you what Generation Z actually is. The first generation raised in a burning world, told to fix it while being handed an economy that doesn't work, a climate that's collapsing, and technology that's designed to addict them. And despite all of this, they're not giving up. They're adapting, innovating, and rejecting every system that failed the generations before them. Today, I'm revealing the psychology of Generation Z. Born between 1997 and 2012, the first true digital natives, the most educated generation in history, and psychologically, the most misunderstood. This isn't about defending them or attacking them. This is about understanding what happens when you raise humans in constant crisis with unlimited information and zero economic security. Digital natives, digital prisoners. Gen Z doesn't remember life before smartphones. They don't remember a world without social media, without constant connectivity, without their entire existence being documented and broadcast. This isn't an advantage. This is psychological warfare they didn't consent to. Research from San Diego State University shows that Gen Z has the highest rates of anxiety and depression of any generation at the same age. Not because they're weak, because their brains developed in an environment of constant comparison, instant feedback, and algorithmic manipulation. Every moment of their adolescence was documented, every mistake potentially permanent, every achievement measured against millions of others doing it better. While millennials adopted social media as adults with already formed identities, Gen Z built their identities inside these platforms. Their self-worth became inseparable from metrics, likes, followers, views, validation reduced to numbers. Neuroscience shows that adolescent brains are especially vulnerable to dopamine manipulation. Social media companies knew this and optimized their platforms for addiction during the exact years Gen Z's brains were developing. This created a generation that's simultaneously hyper-connected and profoundly lonely. They have 1,000 online friends, but struggle with face-to-face intimacy. They can communicate globally, but feel isolated locally. Mental health awareness, mental health crisis. Gen Z talks about mental health more openly than any generation in history. They normalize therapy. They discuss anxiety and depression without shame. They prioritize psychological well-being, and they're also experiencing mental health crises at unprecedented rates. This isn't contradiction, this is correlation. The same awareness that helps them seek support also reveals how many of them are struggling. Studies from the American Psychological Association show that Gen Z reports the worst mental health of any living generation. Higher anxiety, higher depression, higher rates of self-harm and suicidal ideation. Why? Because they inherited multiple crises simultaneously: economic inequality, climate catastrophe, political polarization, pandemic trauma, school shootings, all while their brains were being rewired by addictive technology. But here's what older generations miss. Gen Z isn't weak for struggling with this. They're honest. Previous generations suffered in silence, self-medicated with alcohol, and called it strength. Gen Z acknowledges the problem and seeks solutions. The Stoics would recognize this wisdom. Marcus Aurelius wrote extensively about his own struggles. Seneca discussed anxiety openly. They understood that acknowledging reality is the first step to handling it. Gen Z's openness about mental health isn't fragility, it's courage previous generations didn't have. Entrepreneurial, out of necessity. Gen Z doesn't trust traditional career paths. They don't believe in corporate loyalty. They don't think a college degree guarantees anything. This isn't entitlement, this is pattern recognition. They watch millennials do everything right, get degrees, work hard, follow the rules, and still drown in student debt while being unable to afford houses. They saw the social contract break down before they even entered it. Research shows Gen Z has the highest entrepreneurial aspirations of any generation. Side hustles, content creation, freelancing, multiple income streams. They're not building careers, they're building portfolios. This isn't because they're ambitious, it's because they don't trust any single employer or system to provide security. They've seen too many layoffs, too many industries collapse, too many promises broken. Psychologically, this creates both opportunity and burden. The freedom to create your own path versus the anxiety of having no guaranteed stability. Gen Z carries both constantly. The authenticity paradox. Gen Z values authenticity above everything. They reject polished corporate messaging. They trust influencers who show their flaws. They cancel brands and celebrities for perceived fakeness. Yet they curate their own lives obsessively. Every photo edited, every caption crafted, every story designed to project a specific image. This paradox reveals their psychological reality. They crave genuine connection, but exist in systems designed for performance. They want to be authentic, but know that authenticity is also content to be judged and monetized. Studies on identity formation show that Gen Z struggles more with authentic self-expression than previous generations, because their formative years happened in public, online, subject to constant feedback and judgment. They're not hypocrites for demanding authenticity while performing. They're trapped in a system where being authentic requires performance, and performance prevents authenticity. Information overload, analysis paralysis. Gen Z has access to unlimited information, every question answered instantly, every topic explorable infinitely, every perspective available. This should make them the most informed generation. Instead, it often creates paralysis. Research on decision-making shows that excessive choice and information leads to worse decisions and lower satisfaction. Gen Z experiences this constantly. Too many career options, too many relationship models, too many ways to live. Previous generations had limited paths. You went to college or you didn't. You got married or you didn't. You followed relatively clear scripts. Gen Z has infinite paths and no scripts, complete freedom and complete confusion. They can be anything, which means they're paralyzed trying to choose the right thing. This manifests as constant research, endless comparison, and difficulty committing to choices because what if there's something better? The Stoics dealt with this through focus on what's controllable. Epictetus taught that freedom isn't unlimited options, it's choosing wisely among available options. Gen Z needs this wisdom desperately. Social justice warriors or justice seekers. Gen Z is labeled too sensitive, easily offended, obsessed with social justice issues. Let's examine this psychologically. Gen Z grew up with instant access to global injustice. They saw police brutality videos before they were teenagers. They learned about climate catastrophe in elementary school. They witnessed inequality in real time, constantly. Research shows that exposure to suffering, especially during development, creates either desensitization or heightened empathy. Gen Z chose empathy. Their focus on social justice isn't performative weakness. It's refusing to normalize injustice just because previous generations did. Yes, this sometimes manifests as cancel culture and purity tests, but the underlying psychology is refusing to accept that's just how things are when things demonstrably aren't working. Previous generations saw injustice and said, that's life. Gen Z sees injustice and says, that's unacceptable. This isn't naivety. This is refusing inherited cynicism. Financial pragmatism meets economic despair. Gen Z is simultaneously the most financially pragmatic generation and the most financially anxious. They understand money better than millennials did at the same age. They invest younger. They side hustle earlier. They're more cautious about debt. But they also know the math doesn't work. Housing prices versus wages, education costs versus earning potential, retirement age versus life expectancy. They've done the calculations. The American dream is mathematically impossible for most of them. Studies show Gen Z has the lowest home ownership expectations of any generation, not because they don't want homes, because they've accepted they probably can't afford them. This creates psychological tension between pragmatism and despair. They're making smart financial choices while knowing those choices won't be enough. Unlike millennials who feel betrayed by broken promises, Gen Z never believed the promises. They're not angry. They're grimly realistic. The community craving. Despite being the most digitally connected generation, Gen Z craves authentic community desperately. They're joining niche online communities, creating found families, building networks based on shared interests rather than geography or circumstance. Research shows Gen Z values community and collaboration more than individual achievement. This is radically different from boomer individualism or Gen X self-reliance. They understand that the challenges they face, climate, economy, inequality, can't be solved individually. They need collective action. This manifests in everything from group projects to social movements to collaborative content creation. Psychologically, this represents wisdom. The Stoics wrote extensively about community and our interconnected nature. Marcus Aurelius recognized that humans are social creatures who need each other. Gen Z gets this intuitively. They're rebuilding community in digital spaces because physical spaces have become unaffordable and inaccessible. Short attention spans or optimized processing. Everyone says Gen Z has 8-second attention spans. Can't focus, need constant stimulation. Here's the psychological reality. Gen Z processes information faster and more efficiently than any previous generation. They're not distracted, they're filtering. Growing up with infinite content taught them to assess quality instantly. Is this worth my time? They know within seconds and move on if it's not. Research on cognitive adaptation shows that brains optimize for their environment. Gen Z's environment is information abundance, so their brains developed rapid filtering mechanisms. They can maintain deep focus on content they value. They can learn complex skills through YouTube tutorials. They can build expertise fast when they're interested. The issue isn't their attention span. It's that most content isn't designed for their processing speed. The therapy generation. Gen Z normalizes therapy in ways previous generations never did. Seeking help isn't weakness. Having a therapist is as normal as having a doctor. This represents massive psychological progress. Previous generations suffered in silence, self-destructed privately, and called it resilience. Gen Z understands that mental health is health, that trauma needs treatment, that you don't have to fix everything yourself. Research shows that Gen Z seeks professional mental health support at significantly higher rates than any previous generation at the same age. Not because they're more broken, because they're more willing to address being broken. This is strength disguised as vulnerability. The courage to say, "I need help," requires more psychological fortitude than suffering silently. The burden of awareness. Gen Z knows too much, too young. Climate projections, economic inequality data, global conflict in real time, algorithmic manipulation, corporate malfeasance, political corruption. Previous generations could remain ignorant. Gen Z can't. The information is unavoidable, constant, and overwhelming. This creates what psychologists call eco-anxiety or climate grief, knowing catastrophe is coming and feeling powerless to stop it. Studies show Gen Z experiences significantly higher rates of existential anxiety than previous generations. Not because they're dramatic, because they're informed and the information is terrifying. Yet they're still showing up, still trying to change systems, still building despite knowing it might all collapse. This isn't hopelessness. This is courage. Doing the work even when you're not sure it matters. What Gen Z teaches us. Gen Z is adapting to impossible circumstances. They're honest about struggle. They're building community in hostile environments. They're rejecting systems that don't serve them. They're prioritizing mental health. They're creating multiple income streams. They're fighting for justice, despite cynicism. Every generation inherits the world the previous generation created. Gen Z inherited crisis and is refusing to accept it as inevitable. Now I want to hear from you. Are you Gen Z? Or do you recognize these psychological patterns regardless of when you were born? What resonates most? Drop a comment below. If this video changed how you think about Generation Z and the unique psychological challenges they face, hit that like button. Subscribe and turn on notifications for more deep dives into generational psychology and the hidden forces shaping how we think and behave. Share this with someone who dismisses Gen Z as weak or entitled. Understanding their psychology reveals strength most people refuse to see. Thank you for watching. Gen Z is not the problem. They're attempting to solve problems they didn't create. That deserves recognition, not dismissal. I'll see you in the next video.